The Ottoman Empire was a gunpowder empire because they relied on gunpowder to keep power. After the Ottomans came to power, they used the siege cannon to defeat Constantinople. Janissaries were trained for artillery and firearms and became a very elite and powerful group. The resistance of the Janissaries to accept light field artillery contributed to the downfall of the Ottomans. The Ottomans defeated the Safavid, declaring a Sunni Islam as the dominant branch. They were a centralized bureaucracy with a sultan as a figurehead, but really the Grand Viziers ruled most of the empire. Neo-Confucianism was the main religion in China at this time. The Ming emperors continued to rule China until the mid-1600s, but the dynasty was in decline for many years before that. Although its cultural brilliance and economic achievements continued until about 1600, China had some of the same problems that the Muslim empires had: difficult borders to guard, expensive armies to maintain, and transportation and communication issues. Portugal was the first European kingdom to explore other lands seriously. For most of the 16th century, the Portuguese dominated Indian Ocean trade. The ships were armed with cannons that they used so skillfully that their relatively small ships could overpower almost any other type of vessel. The Portuguese were intent on converting all that they met to Christianity.
During the 16th century, Spain claimed and kept more and more land in the Western Hemisphere. In 1519, a Spanish expedition led by Hernán Cortés marched to the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan and defeated the great empire with only a few hundred soldiers. Gunpowder technology revolutionized the world during the years from 1450 to 1750, and the Amerindians were among its first victims. Disease also made a big difference. Spain had the #1 naval force because of several technological developments such as lateen sails and the maritime compass. Russia overthrew the Mongols and developed an absolute monarchy ruled by a Tsar with absolute power. The Russian Empire had expanded all the way from its origins in Eurasia east to the Pacific coast. Peter the Great, who ruled Russia during the late 17th and early 18th centuries, cast his eyes toward Europe for guidance in strengthening his growing empire. Russia's early days had been shaped by the Byzantine Empire, and when the Byzantines' power failed, so did that of the early Russian Tsars. Before Peter's rule, Russians had almost no contact with Europe, and their lack of access to warm water ports crippled their ability to participate in the maritime revolution. During this period, France evolved to an increasingly centralized state organized around a powerful absolute monarchy that relied on the doctrine of the divine right of kings. The Atlantic trade systems reduced the importance of the Mediterranean ports, which hurt France's economy. There was a religious war in France between the Calvinists and the Catholics. France was the model for the new monarch, the absolute monarchy.
England was a parliamentary and representative government with Protestant religion and a capitalistic system. Henry VIII received a big windfall by confiscating the wealth of Catholic monasteries when he officially separated the English Church from Rome. The Tokugawa shogunate in Japan was a bureaucracy run by daimyos. The warrior castes of the samurai were at the top, followed by farmers, artisans, and traders. The inflexible nature of the social system unleashed disruptive forces over time. The Mughal Empire was a Muslim imperial power over the Indian subcontinent, which began in 1526, ruled most of the Indian subcontinent by the late 17th and early 18th centuries, and ended in the mid-19th century. At the height of its power, around 1700, it controlled most of the Indian subcontinent. During this period, the empire was marked by a highly centralized administration connecting the different regions. The Oyo Empire was a West African empire of what is today southwestern Nigeria. The Oyo Empire was the most important state in the region from the mid-17th to the late 18th century, holding sway not only over the other Yoruba kingdoms in modern-day Nigeria, Republic of Benin, and Togo, but also other African kingdoms.
Witchcraft hysteria reflected economic and religious uncertainties. Women were the most common targets. Women still didn't have a role in government nor any type of politics. They stayed at home and catered to the children, while men did all the government work. Marriage remained a primarily economic arrangement, which was to gain and transfer wealth and land, ensured inheritance of goods, and, with the Protestant Reformation, gained more marriages based on love. This was the big era for slave systems and slave trade, with the new European colonies in the Americas relying on slavery very heavily. The transatlantic slave trade was the most abominable and cruel form of slavery. Slaves could occasionally rise to positions of importance or buy their own freedom. Nonetheless, a master had ultimate power over his slaves. After many Amerindians died from disease transmitted by contact with Europeans, a vigorous slave trade from Africa began and continued throughout most of the era. Slave labor became very important all over the Americas.
The Columbian Exchange is defined as the transfer of peoples, animals, plants, and diseases between the Old and New Worlds. This exchange started as a result of Christopher Columbus discovering the New World in 1492. This was a major turning point in both the New and Old World's cultures and histories. Europe, being obsessed with money-making already, saw the New World as nothing but profit. After just a few decades, the slave trade had begun and Europe was making tons of money. Some other major things that Europe transferred were gunpowder, horses, and the Catholic Church. New foods transformed the New and Old Worlds. New foods for Europe included corn, potatoes, squash, and turkey meat. Tobacco was also new to Europe and they quickly began using it. An example of how European life was transformed by new foods is potatoes in Ireland. Potatoes grew amazingly well in Ireland and they quickly became 100% dependent on them. When the potato famine hit, they suffered tremendously. The Amerindians were also introduced to many new things. Pigs, cattle, and wheat are just a few. Through Europe, African products were also introduced. Some of those African products were onions, citrus, coffee beans, rice, and sugarcane. All of those products were important, but nothing changed New World life like the introduction of the horse. Europe also introduced some things that changed the New World negatively. They introduced deadly diseases like the Black Plague, smallpox, malaria, typhus, and measles. These diseases alone killed thousands of the native peoples due to their lack of immunity. As a result of the new trade routes, the variety in many people's diet increased and resulted in better nutrition and health. Disease was also transferred with the most devastating effects on the Amerindian populations. The revival of interest in Greek and Roman influence also stimulated developments in math and science. Italian scientist Galileo Galilei really took the hit for Copernicus's work when he strengthened Copernicus's heliocentric theory. Galileo was arrested and put on trial for heresy, eventually recanting his theory publicly in order to save his own life. Enlightenment philosophers believed that the same human reason that discovered laws of science could also discover the laws that govern social and political behavior. The movement was also inspired by the Protestant Reformation, which had challenged and revised accepted religious thought, and by contact with political and social philosophies from other parts of the world. John Locke and Jacques Rousseau developed the ideas of the social contract and natural rights. Benjamin Franklin was also a major figure of the Enlightenment because of his humble beginnings and rise to greatness. The Enlightenment was effective in motivating writers of the American Declaration of Independence, Bill of Rights, and the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. African culture contributed to the Americas with their music, because African music led to the birth of rock and roll and jazz. As more and more British people began to settle in North America, the predominant language spoken became English. This colonization influence is shown in each European colony, such as Brazil, where they now speak Portuguese, and in Mexico, where they now speak Spanish.
Neo-Confucianism was a new type of Confucianism and supported strict obedience to the state and increased its influence. It had first emerged as a powerful philosophy during the Sung era and was very strong. Numerous Confucian schools were founded by the emperors to reinforce its principles. Mughal art and architecture often blended Muslim styles with those of other societies. Mughal architecture blended the white marble typical of Indian architecture with the arches and domes of the Islamic world. The most well-known Mughal architecture is the Taj Mahal, constructed by Shah Jahan as a tomb for his wife Mumtaz. The Safavid Empire was famous for their Persian rugs, which consisted of complex geometric designs instead of animals and humans. These Persian rugs became the main product that they traded. The first argument is that Europe was visionary in thinking and that a few greats, such as Prince Henry the Navigator and Sir Isaac Newton, spurred others on. The second argument is that European culture caused Europe to ultimately dominate the world. A third theory is economic. Europe needed markets and resources, so they went and got them. Mercantilism was created, an economic system where the mother country has colonies and restricts them to trade only with the mother. The growth of trade and commerce fostered the growth of capitalism, which is also an economic system that is based on the private ownership of property and on investments with the hope of profit. During this time period, the world truly became globalized.
European countries had to have large, powerful navies because they conquered lands so far away from home. Asian countries were also making their presence known to their neighbors, and since they stayed on the Asian continent, they only needed a large army. The way both places treated the natives of the new lands were also different. Asia tended to hold their conquered peoples in a higher respect since they were extremely similar in culture.